Thank you, Tina, and good afternoon, everyone. Cabinet met this morning by teleconference, and I'll be happy to answer any questions related to Cabinet or anything else in the media. But first, I want to update Nova Scotians on Dr. Strang's health and to talk to you about our next steps in reopening the province. Dr. Strang and I have been talking on the phone this week, and he's asked me to let you know that his procedure went well and he's doing fine, and he continues to self-isolate at home. The good doctor and I have been very encouraged to see several days in a row of no new cases of COVID. That's thanks to all of you who have been following the public health protocols, and also because we are flattening the curve. Dr. Strang and I agree that it's time to bring down the bubble and gatherings up. Effective today, we are bursting the bubble to allow gatherings of 10 without physical distancing. We know that a lot of you have been waiting for months to come in close contact with people you love. Dr. Strang and I are all happy to tell you you can finally get that long-awaited hug from your grandchild, a parent, or a close friend. Your group of 10 is not required to be exclusive, but we strongly encourage that you maintain a consistent group as much as possible. You can also now take part in a gathering of up to 50 people. But outside of your group of 10, you must maintain physical distancing. And let's not forget the other core principles. Washing your hands, good hygiene, and wearing a mask when you feel that it is necessary. And definitely when you can't maintain physical distancing. Summer officially arrives this weekend, but we've had amazing weather. And we know how important it is to get your children outside. And COVID has been difficult on our kids. They've had to come up with new ways to play, and one thing we know they've missed is their local playground. So to the kids out there, your playgrounds are open, effective today, so hit the slide, climb the monkey bars, or swing high. And most importantly, have fun and be safe. Our cases of COVID are down, and that's good news, but until there's a vaccine, we need to learn to live with COVID. And as we open up our province, including to visitors from other provinces, we have to be vigilant to follow the protocols. We will be able to flatten the curve, and we will continue to do that as we welcome people from around other provinces. But we can't stop. Dr. Strang and I are discussing about opening ourselves up with the Atlantic bubble with our Atlantic colleagues, and that will be our first step. And the next step after that will be opening up our province to the rest of Canada. We have to be open to this because tourism is one of the most important industries. It employs tens of thousands of Nova Scotians, and we need people to get back to work so that they can feed their families and keep our communities alive. And I want to say thank you to all of you for the hard work that you've been putting in on behalf of all Nova Scotians, and it makes me proud to be your Premier. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Premier. Again, we'll take one question and one follow-up from reporters on the phone in the allotted time that we have. We'll start with Mike Gorman from CBC. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Premier. Just on the note of bubbles, as you know, the Premier from PEI had thrown around a speculative date not that long ago, and then I think you put a bit of cold water on that. So just for people's information, when you talk about the idea of opening up to Atlantic Canada, what kind of a time frame are you envisioning, and by extension, how much further down the road would it have to be before you would open up to the rest of Canada?
So what I said was that before I could open up our province to other provinces, quite frankly the country, we required to allow Nova Scotia families to increase their bubble, to release some of the restrictions on citizens within our province. I think it was a fair thing to do, the appropriate thing to do, and it continued with our measured approach of ensuring that we protected the health of Nova Scotians as we also continue to open up the economy. I've been dealing with our Atlantic colleagues on the issue of an Atlantic bubble. We've all continued to agree to have a conversation on what's the appropriate date that we could agree on to opening up. And we will continue that and have more to say with them in the near future. And at the same time, it is my hope that towards the end of the second week of July, third week of July, that we'll be opening up our province to the country.
Go ahead, Mike, with your follow-up.
Premier, I just want to preface this question by noting that I am not asking you to comment on any type of legal matter that is before the courts. I'm wondering, though, Do you have concerns about the way the RCMP has been communicating with the public in general and families specifically affected by the shooting in Portapic and surrounding areas, insofar as a lot of people feel like they've not been given very much information considering how far removed we are now from the shooting?
Well, first of all, as you know, there's an ongoing investigation. Minister Fury has been working with our national counterpart, Minister Blair. We're ready to go to have a look at what happened on that particular day, which would include the involvement of the RCMP, other agencies, what happened and transpired to answer the questions for Nova Scotians. And I believe that would be one of those questions that will be answered during that process.
Next, we'll go to Brian Flynn from All Nova Scotia. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, Premier. I just want to make sure I understand some of the sequencing you're talking about with lifting restrictions. A lot of businesses seem to want to be able to plan what's coming up, and that they need to do some marketing and so on. So I just want to understand, do you expect there's going to be a lifting of border restrictions among the Atlantic provinces first and then expanding to the rest of the country, or will it all come at once?
There will be an opening with, as I said in my remarks, the first step would be the Atlantic bubble, and then we want to open up to the rest of Canada.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Brian.
Right. So the Atlantic bubble, I believe you said in response to Mike Gorman's question that you're expecting the rest of the country to be the second or third week of July. I'm not. Please correct me if I got that wrong. But if that's the case, when would the Atlantic bubble possibly occur?
Well, I'll work with my Atlantic colleagues to ensure that we have a consistent opening here in the region. We spoke about it last week, and I'm sure we'll speak about it in the coming days. But it would be appropriate and I believe prudent on our part as a province and as a region to open up within the region. But I can tell you, I am wanting to open up to the rest of Canada the second and third week, towards the end of the second week, third week of July in that general area. We have to learn to live with COVID. We need to figure out how we're going to be able to move about inside of this country. And we've been able to do that, quite frankly, because of the hard work of Nova Scotians to be able to flatten the curve, continue to follow public health protocols. And I think it's important, as I'm sure all of you know, that when we open up, we will still have those physical distances restrictions. Airlines will have things we'll have to follow. All of those public health protocol issues will continue to have to remain in place as we learn to live with it.
Next, we'll go to Paul Hollingsworth from CTV. Go ahead, Paul. Paul, are you there?
I am there. Sorry, Tina. Premier, thanks for taking my call, and thanks for taking my question. We're doing a story today on private daycares and non-for-profit daycares in the province. We're hearing reports that they're nowhere near 50% enrollment in this first week back since the restrictions have been lifted, and a lot of them are concerned about their survival. So my question to you is, have you given some thought to financial assistance, contingency plans for these facilities going forward? Because if several of them collapse, of course, it could cause a lot of other pressure points in the province.
So one of the things that we did when we announced our restrictions around COVID was actually continue to invest in both private and public childcare. We continued to make sure we provided our subsidies covering the costs associated with that, because we know how important and valuable the work that the childcare sector is doing in our province. I will tell you, and they as a sector will tell you, it is the first time that a government of any political stripe has recognized the importance, and that when there was an impact on our public education system, we also ensured that we treated our childcare sector equally as we went through this together. We, as you know, opened up with the advice of public health around 50% occupancy for our childcare sector. My understanding is, Paul, is that that's been going well. I have said to, and I've heard where some are not reaching that 50%, but our department will work with them as we move back. Because families are, there's all kinds of reasons why. And some is just, families are nervous about what does this look like, and we're easing our way back in with them, and their confidence is building. But we'll work with the sector, business by business, organization by organization, to make sure that we look at their unique circumstances and work with them to ensure that those places will be there in the future.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Paul.
No, I'm fine, Tina. Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Premier.
Thank you, Paul. Next, we'll go to Jean Laroche from CBC. Go ahead, Jean.
Thank you very much. Quick question, Premier. When you open up the bubble, or burst the bubble, I think you used the term, will you lift the mandatory 2-week isolation requirement for anyone coming to our province?
No, that's not part of that at all. That is about what we're talking about is the what would have been the family bubble. Those of us who live in this province, your network of people here, they don't have to be family. You choose who that 10 people will be. We're not restricting you to that. What we said, though, we encourage you strongly. Public health would tell you that you be consistent with who that 10 are. And we move forward. But I would say to you, anyone has been allowed to come into our province. If they own property here or not, they could come. They just had to have a plan to self-isolate for those 14 days. That is kind of the restrictions that we're talking about when we say the Atlantic bubble. That's when you would look at restricting those. And the same thing as I talk about the rest of Canada. When we start opening it up, it would be, in the sense, taking down those 14 days of isolation.
Go ahead, John, with your follow-up.
Premier, how concerned are you, though, about this 2-week mandatory isolation and the impact it has on industry, including the film industry?
Well, obviously, it's had an impact on everyone. There's no question about it. The reality of it is, though, if you go back to the delivery of public health, advice was that 14 days of quarantine. What we're seeing is very positive signs of being able to deal with, and we've seen that we flattened the curve. Very few cases coming out in our province is now why public health and government can look at lifting those restrictions and gradually lifting them inside of our region and then really across the country. But our number one issue going on was public health, and I think it's important for everyone that when we started with COVID. We had to be able to isolate that virus aggressively. Many of the public health protocols, the 6 feet distancing, all of those things were not part of our normal daily lives. They are now becoming more and more part of that. So it allows us to deal with the issue differently, and quarantine would be one of them. So that's what we'll continue to do, and we'll continue to do it in the appropriate way that will allow our province not only to weather this, but how do we deal with a second wave? This is all important. When we open up our province, these public health protocols will be put in place, and we'll have to continue to follow them. And as we do that, if there is a second wave, we won't kind of get the spike like we did in the midst of this one, or like other Canadian provinces did, and we'll be able to continue to keep our economy going. One of the worst things that can happen for everyone out there who's yelling and screaming and about taking down boundaries, lifting up, taking down the barriers and all of that, don't recognize that if we have to close businesses again this year, there will be no future for them. We're trying to be measured about this. We know this is hurting the businesses. We know this has been impactful on them. We know it's been painful on those families. But we want to make sure that as we open them and continue to open them, that we keep them in a position that they will be viable in the long term.
Next, we'll go to Alicia Drouse from Global. Go ahead, Alicia.
Thank you. My question is in regard to opposition party members are growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of accountability with government. Case in point, the lack of committee meetings right now and no schedule for any return. So I'm just wondering, why haven't committee meetings at least moved to some online formats like many of the provincial legislatures have done across the country?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with your premise or agree with the opposition. At the beginning of this, we've had daily briefings with them. We opened up with our caucus offices. And they've chosen to participate or not. That's a decision they will make. We've kept them briefed on this whole issue. If you follow the legislative requirements in our province, there are 2 sittings a year. There's one in the spring and one in the fall. We had an early sitting that we had planned. We passed a budget. All 3 parties voted to adjourn the House. No one said Nova Scotia legislature was working harder than any other Canadian province at that time. Other Canadian provinces have different requirements. They are legislated to sit at this moment in time. We're not. They don't have budgets passed. We have a budget passed. Our committees unanimously voted to adjourn and suspend committee meetings during that period of time to be open and transparent. Our caucus has a majority on those committees, and we did so because we thought it was important, quite honestly, that public health and our health department focused on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians. That's what our goal is, to deal with the issue of COVID. How do we continue to reopen our healthcare system that we reduced by 30%? That's the focus that Nova Scotians have asked us to continue to go on. We will have a fall sitting whenever the House is adjourned. Whenever the House is called it, we'll give the Speaker 30 days notice. And I sit in front of Nova Scotians daily. I'm sure there are many Nova Scotians who are watching this right now, are asking themselves how much more open and transparent could the Premier be, short of being on this newscast every day. Now, the opposition doesn't like it. I get that. I get media may not like the answers that we give them of why those committees are not sitting. I get all of that, but there's nothing untoward here. We had our spring session. We passed our budget. We just passed some expropriation measures to deal with some of the issues associated with moving our province forward, which we have done every year since I've been the Premier, which the NDP did every year they were in government, which the Conservative Party has done every year when they were leading our province. The only difference is that we believe that it's more important that Dr. Strang and Public Health focus on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians instead of sitting in a committee room. We believe it's more important that the Department of Health focus on the health and well-being of running a healthcare system in the midst of a pandemic, dealing with the issues that are associated with that in long-term care, instead of sitting in a committee room. There will be lots of time for the opposition to criticize. There will be lots of time for all of you to get your questions in, and you'll be able to, and fully and transparently, as we have done as a government, lay it out. And just as I've laid out to you how it works in the province, I would appreciate it when you write columns and you say that every other legislature sitting, that you would say that Nova Scotia's the government of Nova Scotia has met its obligations, and the reason we're not sitting is because we already had our session, and the reason the other governments in this country are sitting is either a minority or they've not met their obligation to the citizens of their province. That would be open and transparent to the readers and listeners of your shows and articles.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Alicia.
Thank you. This one is in regards to the ongoing calls for an inquiry into the mass shooting from April. And I'm just wondering what the status of that is, and also if you have anything to say to the allegations stemming from the latest lawsuit that RCMP returned a vehicle to a victim's family with body parts and gun casings left inside, and the family had to clean it themselves.
Well, I don't know the details of that. That's an horrific situation, obviously, as it's being described. But as it comes to the review of what happened on that particular day, Minister Fury has been working with his colleagues. We as a government are ready to go. We know the national government is interested to move forward, and we want them to have that call, and we want to look at holistically, the relationships of that particular day, the issues of gun control, the issues of importing guns, the call that particular day, levels of enforcement, all of those questions will be part of that inquiry and that review, and we look forward to it happening. The families, as I said before, deserve nothing less than to have their questions answered, and we'll have a process that will actually include those families of the loved ones who were lost on that day.
Next, we'll go to Mike Tutton from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Mike.
Good afternoon, Premier. Just in further to the point on the public inquiry that you've just raised, two questions or two elements there. Will it include, as has been asked by some, a look at the issue of domestic abuse, both the potential legal changes that could be made and the support system in the province?
Well, first of all, that is an ongoing conversation with Minister Fury and the federal minister. But I would say to you that as this review continues out, gender-based violence would be certainly part of that review.
Go ahead, Mike, with your follow-up.
Okay. Maybe I just didn't quite grasp this, so forgive me if I'm asking the same question. So if as you hope, in late July, the province is able to bring other Canadians here in the tourism area, they wouldn't have to stay at one place for 14 days. They could go and travel around. Or are we envisioning that, in fact, people who come here late July, if you can open then, would in fact have to stay somewhere for 14 days?
No, when we start opening our province, in essence, it is right now, the restriction is that anyone's still welcome to come to Nova Scotia, and people are coming, but they have to self-isolate for the 14 days. As we open up the Atlantic bubble, it would eliminate that requirement for Atlantic Canadians, and as we opened up to the rest of Canada, it would eliminate that requirement for our fellow Canadians. At the same time, though, they would, as I said, the public health protocols that would be in place, 6 feet distancing, hand washing, those requirements would still be in place and will be in place for some time to come.
Next, we'll go to Andrew Rankin from the Chronicle Herald. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on the committee questions. I mean, your government has announced hundreds of millions of dollars in COVID-19 related funding, and so MLAs, in the meantime, have lost those, specific public forums to ask questions of your government on behalf of the people who elected them. So MLAs need to be able to do their jobs. So I just want to know, will you consider reopening the public accounts and health committees in particular?
I've been pretty clear, so let me just try it one more time. We have met the requirement of our spring sitting of the legislature. We sat before any other Canadian province, passed a budget that all of the members of the House voted to adjourn. So I'll just be clear, all members of the House have voted to adjourn the House. We then had committee meetings that were ongoing. As you know, in this province during the summer months, typically we would have the Health Committee and Public Accounts Committee. Those committees, which manage themselves, voted to adjourn committee meetings while COVID and for the foreseeable future. And I have been, and to be open and transparent, we have a majority on those committees. So I don't want anyone listening beyond here to feel that I haven't been forthright, like some of the articles that are being read. We have a majority, and we believed it was more important that public health, Dr. Strang, focused on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians. We believed it was more important that as we rebuild our economy of the province, where people were forced to stay home, that we focus on rebuilding the economy of our province, working with our partners. There will be no committee meetings this summer. The committee meetings will reconvene sometime in the fall. We'll give the Speaker 30 days notice when the House is going to be reconvened. In the meantime, I'm asking Dr. Strang, Public Health, our Department of Health, to focus on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians as well as opening up our healthcare system. And I'm asking the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Business, and those involved in driving the economy of this province to focus on rebuilding the economic future of Nova Scotia.
Go ahead, Andrew, with your follow-up.
Thanks. You mentioned that you're expecting, or there could be the possibility of a second wave of the virus hitting this fall. I know many Nova Scotians are still waiting for answers for why the COVID-19 outbreak at Northwood led to 53 deaths at that facility. So will you commit to a public inquiry to get to the bottom of that tragedy and to ensure it doesn't happen again when a second wave is expected to hit in the fall?
First of all, I met this week spoke with Minister Delory and his team looking at long-term care across the province with a focus on Northwood, identifying some of the issues that were associated with the outbreak of COVID-19, lessons learned, protocols to be taken. We'll have a specific review of that, of Northwood, but we'll also review the overall situation of long-term care to put in place, if required, any recommendations that would prepare us for a second wave if there are those recommendations for that.
Next, we'll go to Tim Bousquet from the Halifax Examiner. Go ahead, Tim.
Hi, I'd like to return to the committee thing. Again, Premier, you said that you feel like now is the time to focus on the public health of the province, and therefore the committees aren't meeting. But I wonder what you think the purpose of the health committee is, if not to focus on the public health of the province. And doesn't it set a precedent for any future government to say, well, you know, we have a majority, therefore we don't need to engage any of the opposition?
Well, Tim, I've been here now 17 years. Every committee votes on their meeting schedule. They have that for 17 years, and before that, the committees determine that. And the governing party, who happens to be us at the moment in time, voted. This is not the first time that committees have not sat in the summer. It is the first time, though, Tim, that we've had a pandemic in my 17 years. It is the first time that public health is required to focus on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians in such an environment. Even you would have to agree with that. So I think Nova Scotians would expect us to focus on that first. I realize that there will be lots of time for you and the opposition to question Dr. Strang, and we'll do that. But I'm not willing, quite frankly, to put at risk the health and well-being of Nova Scotians to satisfy a committee meeting. That is just not going to happen, and I've been very clear about it. You can be mad about it. You can disagree with me, and that's okay. But I am going to stay focused on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians, and I'm going to ask public health to do the same thing.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Tim.
Yeah, you know, it's not about being mad or disagreeing. I think the argument that's out there is that in time of crisis, whatever that crisis is, the most democratic input is required. And here we have a health committee whose job it is to focus on the public health of the province, and it's not meeting. I just, it's bewildering to me that you can say on out of one side of your mouth that we need to focus on public health, and then on the other say this health committee whose job is to focus on public health won't be meeting.
I don't know how much more clear I can be, Tim. You would have me have public health sit in a committee room for 2 hours. You would have me have public health prepare for these committee meetings, take time away from the health and well-being of Nova Scotians. It's nonsensical. I appreciate we have different points of view. That's what makes this province a wonderful place. We all have different points of view. Fact of the matter is, I'm staying focused on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians. I expect my members to do the same thing, and I expect public health to do the same thing. If there's MLAs out there that don't have enough to do, I would suggest to themselves they are not doing a very good job in their own constituencies. Go back and do some work and represent and answer the questions of those you represent. Our caucus has laid out with the issue of public health the ability for them to ask questions every day. We'd be happy to answer them, to communicate that back to Nova Scotians. All 51 of us have had the ability every day as caucuses to sit in a committee room and ask public health to go into that committee room when we're in the middle of a pandemic. I think is not wise, and it's unhealthy. We'll debate it, I'm sure, for the months to come, and I'm sure I'll be criticized for it as well. But I'm glad that I'm getting an opportunity to express directly to Nova Scotians through my own words and not through someone else's words exactly the reason why we are doing this. Because I want public health to be focused on Nova Scotians and not the committee room.
Next, we'll go to Cassandra Nadeau-Lamache, Radio-Canada. Go ahead, Cassandra.
Yes, I just want to clarify the limit of gathering of 50 people. I think you said it was for outside. I just want to make sure. Is it for only outside, or is it for inside and outside?
No, the 50 gathering will be, you need to be able to practice the 6 feet self-distancing. There are some places where you'll be able to do that inside, but by the vast majority of that, it'll be outside.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Cassandra.
I don't have a follow-up. Thank you.
Great, and that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Premier.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you to Nova Scotians.